In this video, we'll remember how to add gravity and have it bounce, and then I'll show you how you can spawn lots of objects, and we'll do a quick review of how to add them to a list. So, step 1, I'm going to rename player to be ball. Try this because it's a helpful thing to do. You click on player, then you hit Alt-Shift-R, and see how it's added a box around all the players? Now as I type, it'll change everything everywhere. So I can type ball. Be careful, you have to hit the enter key, and then it will refactor to change all of them. Okay, if I want it to bounce, I need to add gravity. I'll say ball.setY acceleration, so that's acceleration in the up-down direction, and I'll set the Y acceleration to 0.4. That should accelerate the ball downwards. Let's make sure it works. There it goes. Now I want it to bounce off the floor. I'll say if ball.getBottomSide-Y. So if the bottom side of my ball. So if ball.getBottomSide-Y is greater than 600, I must be hitting the bottom of the screen. So I'll say ball.reverse-Y speed, because that will make it bounce. Let's see what it looks like. And there I'm bouncing. Let's delete that and start just by spawning a whole bunch of stationary objects. So I'll delete this, and delete this, and delete this, and delete these. So now I have no objects at all. If I want a lot of objects, remember you need to keep them in a list. So I'll create an array list like this. Array list, and then inside triangle brackets you have to say what kind of thing goes in the list. In this case, we want thing to go in the list. I'm going to call this list balls. Remember, you have to hover over ArrayList and say import ArrayList. Again, notice there's no magic here. This is just like creating any other variable. If balls was supposed to be an integer, I'd type int. If it was supposed to be a string, I'd type string. So, typing this just means I want it to be a list of thing objects, but balls is the name of the list of thing objects. Okay, I actually have to give it a value now, so I'll say balls equals new ArrayList thing, and then you need opening and closing parentheses to run the constructor. So I'm going to spawn one object every single time draw loops. And here's how I'm going to do it. If I want to make a new thing object, I've got to declare a variable. So I'll say thing, and then I'll call my thing thing. Alright, I'll say equals new thing. And now you have to give it the right inputs. The first input is always going to be this. The keyword this is a special word that means bundle up the current executing object. The current object is a p-applet, which means a graphics window. So essentially, we're just saying when I make the new thing object, take our current graphics window and give it to the new object. The object needs this so that it can draw itself. Okay, next we give it its x and y position. I'm going to create it at 300, 300. Then you give it its velocity. Mine's not going to be moving. Then you give it its acceleration, and mine's not going to be moving. So there, I've made a new thing object. The next thing I want to do is I want to set my thing objects to have a random position. So I'll say thing.setRandomPosition, and I'm going to give it a minimum x of 0. No, I'm going to give it a minimum x of 100, a maximum x of 400, a minimum y of 100, and a maximum y of 500. Now that I've got my random thing object, I need to put it into the list. So I'll say balls.add, because I'm asking my list to add this object, and the object I'm adding is called thing. The last thing I need to do is I need to loop through every object in the list and move it and display it. I'm going to add some comments. This says create new object. This says move and display all objects. Alright, so if you remember, to loop through all the things in a list, I need to start with a for loop. I'll say the location starts at 0. The location has to be less than balls.size, because that's all of the locations in the list. And then location equals location plus 1. And now, in order to do something to everything in a list, I have to get the things out of the list one at a time. So I'll say thing t equals balls.getLock. Remember, I'm asking the list to give me the ball at this location. and the ball is called t. Now I can say t.move and t.draw. And then the next time through the loop, I'm going to be asking for the ball in the next location, location 1. So I'll say list, give me the ball in location 1, and I'll move it and draw it. And then the next time through the loop, I'll say list, give me the ball in location 2, and I draw it and move it. So this moves and displays all the objects. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. Let's do some changes. Let's make them spawn a little bit smaller. So here, before I add the object to the list, I want to set its size. So I'll say thing dot, because remember, thing is what I want to change the size of. I wouldn't say balls dot anything, because that's the name of the list, and I'm not asking the list to do something, I'm asking the object to do something. So set size, I can set its width and its height. So I'm going to set the size to be 5 by 5. It's going to be very tiny. Now when I run it, that looks a lot better. Okay, what if I don't want to add them so quickly? Let's create a timer. To create a timer, up at the very top, I'll create an int called counter, and I'll set it to 0. Then I only want to create a new object if my count is big enough. So here I'll say counter equals counter plus 1, so I'm counting up. And now I'll say if counter is larger than, let's say 30. Then I'm going to do all of this stuff here. So the part that creates the new object is now inside my if statement. At the very end, I want to set the counter back to 0 again, because if it's counted up to 30 and I've made a new object, I want to set it back to 0 so that I can start counting up again from 0, and then when it reaches 30 again, I'll create another object. Let's see what this looks like. So now they're adding a lot slower. If I wanted to do something fun, you could combine what you learned in the last section with this new ability. So what if I wanted these all to be accelerating towards my mouse all the time? Right here, where I'm moving and displaying all the objects, I'm going to add an acceleration towards the mouse. So double angle equals t.direction toward mouse x, mouse y. Because remember, t is the name of the object that I got out of my list. And I'm doing this for every single object, one at a time. So now that I'm asking my particular object, what direction is it toward the mouse, I'll say t.accelerate in direction, and I'm going to accelerate it by 0.2, and the direction is going to be angle. And now when I run it, as I add more and more objects, they're all accelerating towards my mouse. I'm going to go ahead and take that back out because I want to do something else. Let's go ahead and add back in a player at this point. So at the very top, if I want a player, I don't want my player to be in the same list as all the ball objects because my player is going to be special. I want to control it separately. So I'll say thing player, and then inside the setup, I'll say player equals new thing, and I'll create it with all the inputs. So this, and I'm going to create it at the center of the screen, and it's not going to be moving to start with. Okay, if I want my player to move and display, I know inside draw, I've got to move and display it. So here at the very bottom, I'm going to create code to move player, and I'll say player.move and player.draw. Let's just make sure the player's there. And there he is. Alright, let's go ahead and create the same code that we did last time to have the player move towards my mouse all the time. You might go ahead and stop the video and see if you can recreate that yourself from memory right now. So I'm going to say player.direction, get direction toward mouse x, mouse y, and then I'm going to save that, into a variable called direction. Then I'm going to say player dot get distance to mouse x, mouse y. And I'm going to call that dist. And then I'll say player dot set velocity, and I'll give it the direction and the speed. So the direction I've already called direction. The speed is going to be distance divided by 20. Let's make sure this works. So now my player is moving around towards my mouse, and then I've got these kind of randomly appearing dots. It would be nice if I could do some collision detection to see, is my player hitting any of those dots? So let's do that. I could create a separate loop that loops through every single object in order to check, is it hitting the player? But since I'm already looping through all of them to move them and draw them, I might as well do the collision detection up here. So check if it's hitting the player. So I have this all built in. Anything can check if it's hitting another thing. So I want to check if player dot is hitting, and t is the name of the ball object I'm looking at right now. So as I loop through this list, I'm going to check each one in turn. So if my player is hitting t equals true, that means my player is hitting it. So I could ask the ball list to remove the object t. So that would destroy the object. Now if you look, when I hit them, they disappear because I'm colliding with them and removing them. If you want to, you can have it do other stuff when you remove it. For example, if you had a score, you could say score equals score plus 10. Or if you wanted to create like an interesting object that was like a little explosion, you could do that.